And so we've got to fight back in large numbers, fight back. I can't make it alone. Fight back in large numbers. Together we can make a safe home. Together we can make a safe home. And so we've got to fight back in large numbers, fight back. I can't make it alone. Fight back in large numbers. Together we can make a safe home. Together we can make a safe home.
We're standing in front of the Ontario Legislature. It was here on April 12, 1917, after 30 years of struggle by women's groups, that the Ontario government finally gave women the right to vote. Although the winning of the vote was a step forward for women, we still continue to struggle for the justice, freedom, equality, and choice that our society promises to all. Until we have an equal share of the power and control over our lives, we will continue to be second-class citizens.
The reemergence of the women's movement over the past 15 years has helped to improve our situation. The women's movement is not one group, it is many. It is not a few women, it is thousands and hundreds of thousands. We're fighting for the right to work, for decent wages, for access to all jobs. We are fighting for universally accessible childcare, for the right to control our own bodies, for safe streets. We are fighting against sexual harassment, against the persecution of lesbians, against wife battering and rape.
The struggles and victories of the women's movement are rarely reported in the news media. Instead, the media tells us the women's movement is dead. But we know better. In fact, this dismissal of our concerns is itself an attack against women. The media does not belong to us. So Lauren and I decided to make a program about women's lives, a program that would highlight the struggles of women to make the world a better place. Catherine and Jim Peterson and their daughters Alexa and Anessa live in Hamilton, Ontario. Like many families, the Petersons cannot survive on a single wage. As a machinist, Jim takes home about $230 each week.
We could survive on it, but we wouldn't live very comfortably. I would hate to have to live on what I make.
How do you manage then?
My wife works too.
How do you feel about Catherine working?
I think it's a good idea. She's always worked as long as we've been married and lived together. She's always worked, and it's an economic necessity anyway.
What about a woman's places in the home?
Well, I've never been convinced of that. My mother always worked, and Catherine's always worked. She doesn't like staying home that much, and I don't know where the people got that idea.
No, I don't think I'd prefer to stay home with or without the children. I need to work. I've always worked. My mother worked. I'm not quite sure how I'd survive or my family would survive if I didn't work. And I like working.
All women work in the workforce or at home. In fact, most women will spend 25 years or more in the workforce. Like the majority of workers, women work because they need the money. But Canadian statistics show that women workers are being ripped off. For every dollar that a man earns in Canada, a woman earns only 56 cents. Women did better during the Depression, when we earned 60% of men's wages. The average annual earnings for a man working a full year are $15,255. A woman earns only $8,622. Each woman worker loses $6,633 a year. Women are angry about this wage inequity. We need equal pay for work of equal value. In Ontario, the Equal Pay Coalition is organizing a fight to improve women's wages.
The present law providing equal pay for equal work have many inadequacies. The main problem with it is that most women work in job ghettos, and so a law which allows them to compare their work to a man doing the same work isn't of much help for them. For example, if we have a seamstress working in a factory and she feels she's not getting paid what she should, the law is of no use to her because it only allows her to compare her work to a man who is also a seamstress. But because no men are seamstresses, it doesn't help her much. What we need is a law that provides equal pay for work of equal value. This means that a woman should be able to compare the work that she does to work that a man is doing which is of equal value, even though it isn't the same work. For example, a parking lot attendant should be able to compare his work to a telephone receptionist or vice versa. If Bill 3, which recently came up in the legislature, would have provided equal pay for work of equal value, virtually every single organization we know of in the province has supported equal pay except for the business community, such as the Canadian Manufacturers Association. We have even had support on Bill 3, which was an NDP bill opposed by the Conservative government. That bill was even supported by the Women's Committee of the Conservative Party. And the Conservatives opposing Bill 3 was a clear indication of a government going against the popular will and choosing instead to support the business community, which has always been the constituency of the Conservative government. The question is, why do the business community and the Ontario government not support it? The reason they don't support it is because it's going to cost employers money. Women have been subsidizing this economy for years. Well, it seems to me that issues like equal pay and perhaps childcare are the most important issues of the women's movement. If a woman does not have economic independence, and most women who work now can't possibly have economic independence on the wages they're earning, and if she doesn't have that economic independence, she doesn't have any control over her life.
Low wages are not the only problem which faces women who work.
Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another exciting evening of Choose Your Fate. Our contestant this evening comes all the way from Bridgeton, Ontario. She's Miss Kathy Schwartz, and she's just 10 years old. So come out, my dear, and don't you be shy. But Kathy must decide on her very own what career she wants. Our panelists, basing their judgments on years of experience, will decide if Kathy wins or loses. The prize for the correct answer is no less than her future. Before we begin, let's meet our distinguished panelists. Meet Mr. Pipe, father of 8. Mr. Pipe comes to us with a wealth of experience. You might say that father knows best. And meet Mr. Broker, multi-million-dollar clothing manufacturer. Mr. Broker's factories employs thousands of women sewing clothes. Meet Miss Thimble, devoted nursery school teacher. Thousands of tiny tots have passed through her hands for TLC, tender loving care. And finally, who have we here? It's Buster, the elder brother every girl loves. And now, let the show begin.
I think I'll be a carpenter.
Now, my dear, you're a lovely child, but you can't be a carpenter. Carpenters get, oh, so dirty, and they have to wear baggy overalls all day. Little girls want to be neat and clean.
But
The show must go on.
when I grow up, I think I'll be a pilot.
Only boys can be pilots.
Can you imagine a tiny girl flying a 747? Girls are too delicate. None of my daughters are going to. It's impossible.
And oh, so dangerous, too.
Well, Kathy, this is your last and final chance. Let's give Kathy a nice warm round of applause.
Be a nurse, dear, be a teacher. Work for the president, file his papers, sell cosmetics, even wait on tables.
I think I'll build computers.
Wait, better than that? Yes, I have the perfect job for you. It's working at a shiny Klinger sewing machine in a brand new factory. Now, wouldn't you like that? After all, we don't want those agile little fingers of yours to remain idle or get into mischief, now would we?
Well, I'm sorry, Kathy. We'll have to give your future away to someone else.
For Kathy, this is no game. Nor is it a game for young girls growing up in our society. The majority of women will work for wages most of their lives. Yet pressures from family, school, and employers push young women toward traditional jobs, many of which are low-paying and ununionized. In fact, 62.7% of all Canadian working women are in clerical, sales, and service jobs. In the 80s, women will be demanding access to all jobs, including those traditionally done by men.
Yeah, it's like a monastery, and most factories well, it's changing a little now, but for years it's very male. You see no women. If a woman walks into a factory, it's a shock. Well, some women have started to work at Otis. There's been a program to hire women as semi-skilled workers, and It's been a mixed reaction. Some of the men like the idea very much and have been very supportive. Some have been rather mean and rather cruel about it. I think that most men would accept it and like it once they got used to it. I think they're afraid. They have a lot of fears about women working. They think that the wages will be kept lower if women work in the shop. They think that women will compete with them. The women won't know how to be part of the union and to fit into the sort of shop floor defensive organizations that exist. They think the company are using women to try to break the unions. They think that some people, a lot of people in fact, think that women do belong at home, that they don't have to work. There's a lot of misconceptions about what a woman's life, especially say a single woman or a single parent, single mother's life is like. They don't understand that.
Lynn Joseph and Laurel Fisher, both single parents, have to cope with wage discrimination, job discrimination, and lack of government support for childcare. Laurel and Lynn are both trained as machinists and are trying to get jobs at Steel Car in Hamilton.
When we first applied at National Steel Car, it was basically a case of it being one in a list of many places you just go and look for jobs. It was also one of the places where you got a fairly good wage. It wasn't one of these $4.50 an hour sweatshops. The reason why we pressed charges against National Steel Car, though, is that we feel our applications were not treated in the same way as other male applications were. And in fact, fellow classmates who were, a couple of them who really weren't quite as good as we are, we think, got jobs for positions that we were fully qualified for, and we feel we've been overlooked.
I think basically the biggest problem we have is that the male employer does not believe that we can do the job. Some think it's a joke. Some just absolutely refuse to hire the woman. I'm here to tell you right now that it is no joke. We mean what we say, and what we train for, we can do, and we probably could do a better job because we have to try harder because we're always under the pressure.
The other thing is just going in, applying for a job, having to put down that you're separated, divorced, or whatever. I find myself during interviews that I've been asked a lot of questions that other men have not been asked. Questions concerning my personal life, my care for the children, so almost like my mental stability questions. Never once, in some of the interviews, I was never once asked anything about what I was able to do, why I was even there looking for this type of job. What I consider to be very personal, almost gross sorts of questions. So as a single parent, you're constantly challenged.
I definitely think that women are being discriminated against, single parents especially. When we get a job at a decent wage, or a fairly decent wage, we lose our subsidized daycare, and I don't think that it's right. I think it's another fight that women have to go for. I've never really thought of myself as a feminist. I've always just thought of myself as a woman trying to get a piece of the pie, a decent wage for a job done. And if you can do that job well, and if that's being a feminist, then I guess I'm a feminist.
Stelco, the largest steel plant in Canada, employs 12,000 workers. Since 1961, 30,000 women have applied to work at Stelco. Only 120 women have been hired, most after the Back into Stelco campaign in 1980. Debbie Field is one of those women.
About a year ago, Cease Taylor, who's president of Local 1005, which is the union which represents the people who work at Stelco, the 12,000 production workers who work at Stelco, was talking to a reporter for Spectator, which is the main newspaper in town, and he mentioned something about how there weren't any women working in blue-collar production jobs at Stelco, and he wondered why no women had applied for these jobs. And so various of us women who didn't know each other in town phoned him and asked him what he could do to help us get jobs at Stelco. And he got us all together, and we launched a campaign, a committee called Women Back into Stelco. We called it Women Back into Stelco because during the war, there were numerous women who worked throughout the plant. Stelco stopped hiring women in 1961, so it was 18 years between the time of the last women hired and when we were hired in the last year. It was backed by the union, but it had a support committee which could be called a more traditional women's movement support committee with people who weren't in the union, mostly women who were interested in getting jobs, and other women who were white-collar women who wanted to help us get jobs at Stelco. Stelco blocked hiring women for years and years, like I say, for 18 years, and they were like a dinosaur. They refused to be moved. The only reason they finally hired us is that we had this quite successful campaign, plus the Human Rights Commission told them that they had to, and we all had cases at the Human Rights Commission. But Stelco didn't want to, and they really resisted. I can do the work and I can handle the dirt and the smoke and all that in the same way the men can, but I don't like it. But I don't think any of them do either. It is very hot and it is very dirty, and it's very depressing to work there because it is so hot and dirty, and because you feel your life being really dripped away by the work process. It's $8.50 an hour. Average factory job for a woman in Hamilton is $4.50 to $5 at most. Average secretarial job is $5.50 to $6. And so the comparison of the work at Stelco and the work other places is, quite a stark one. Besides the economic thing, the other key reason why I think the women I've met want to work at Stelco is that it is a challenge to the values which say that a woman can't do this kind of job. The guys feel it as a tremendous affront to their sexism that we are there and the fact that we can do the job. And one guy once said to me, he said, I don't want women here. And I said, why? Don't you think? He said, you can't do the work. I said, well, you've seen I can do the work. He said, well, you're going to get blackheads and your face is going to get all yucky and you won't like it. And I said, well, I don't like it when your face is dirty. What's the difference? And he kept coming up with argument after argument about why I shouldn't be there. And finally, the end result was, he said, I'm surrounded by women all the time. Our mothers, wives, girlfriends, they're all picking on me. Pick up your clothes, stop swearing, come to dinner, always giving me these arguments about how I should behave. I want to be able to come into work and let go, hang loose. I don't want women around. Tremendous understanding amongst working men of the need for working women to have jobs. So even though they make jokes and they don't think I should be there and say these kinds of things, they know, you can tell they know while they're making these jokes, that women have to work.
Women need access to all jobs, but women also need trade unions. Through unions, women can fight for better jobs, higher wages, and improved working conditions. Unfortunately, only 17.4% of working women in Ontario are in trade unions.
You have women who have just been newly unionized and going out on strike over some fundamental union issues, but they were very hardy and they withstood the pressure, especially in the flex strike. I think we have to take a look at that because there was some very unusual things that happened with the amount of police activity in that area, where there were hundreds of OPP officers detached to handle 70, 80 women on a picket line. The fact that women were standing up and saying, we have the right to belong to a union and we have the right to a collective agreement, and we're not going to be pushed around on these issues. These are fundamental basic rights.
For example, the recent strike of the public service clerks is a good example of an action that probably wouldn't have been taken 5 or 10 years ago, and the reason it's being taken now is a growing militance among women workers who are no longer going to stand by and basically support an economy which doesn't give anything to them in return.
Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.
A women's caucus or a women's committee brings women together to discuss items of common concern, to learn about the union and the system and how to work within it, and to help each other. Over the last 2 years, the change in the atmosphere at convention this year, when we see women getting up to the mics and speaking, and men supporting some of the issues that we've been talking about in the equal opportunities area. I think that the caucuses have done a lot of hard work in bringing forward these issues. I think that they are primarily responsible for the fact that OPSU has an equal opportunities program and has a staff position as an equal opportunities coordinator. They've been very successful. We're also looking at things such as sexual harassment in the workplace. For a long time, the only route that an individual could go with a complaint is through the Human Rights Commission, which is a very long, drawn-out procedure, and there's been no protection right within the workplace or within collective agreements, no recognition of the fact that it does exist and that it is a problem. We're concentrating a lot of our efforts on the issue of technological change and how it will affect women in women's work. With the rapid onslaught of microprocessor equipment based on silicon chip computers, such as word processors, data processing equipment, etc., I think we will find, and we've seen it in other countries where they're more advanced, that the first impact is going to be on office and clerical type jobs. We are launching on a campaign, awareness raising for our members, and attempting to negotiate with the employer specific protection in the collective agreement from job loss, provisions for job retraining and job relocation where necessary, and some specific protection on health and safety factors, the ability for pregnant women to opt out of using machines where there's radiation being emitted.
Solidarity forever! Solidarity forever! Solidarity forever! For the union makes us strong!
The problems women face in the workforce are made more difficult by responsibilities for housework and childcare. A 1970 study conducted by the Chase Manhattan Bank found that women spend an average of 100 hours each week doing household chores.
I think the woman should be a housewife. The guy is supposed to support the family.
Like I say, a woman's place is in the house. I'm not trying to be chauvinistic or anything like that, you know, but a woman's place is in the house, and a man has to realize that.
I think that a man should help in the home even if he does work and she doesn't, because she needs time off sometimes in the home to feel that she's worth something, to get her own free time.
Is it preferable for us men not to do that kind of work? Or?
Sure, it's the easy way out, right? I mean, it makes the home the cheapest hotel in town.
One of the hardest parts is coming home from work, picking up a kid at daycare, getting dinner on the table, getting the dishes washed, getting the kids bathed, getting the kids to bed. And by the time you do that, there's nothing left for you. You don't even read the newspaper. It's hard to read a book. It's hard to watch TV even. You're just exhausted.
Because women historically have been tied into childcare, we're the ones who stay home to take care of children traditionally, and that's an extremely isolated job. First and foremost in my mind is the importance of daycare to a child. There's no question in my mind that whether I work or not, I want my child in a daycare center. I believe that the developmental advantages for a child are quite unbelievable. It's where else is a child going to be in contact with the kind of equipment, the kind of skilled people who know how to relate to children, who know how to stimulate their development? I don't know those things. I wasn't trained to do that. And I need all the help that I can get in order to do my job as a mother. So I'm very excited. I mean, I think the fact that my little boy kicks and screams when I take him home begins to tell me that he likes that. When I participate in the labor force in a way that's meaningful to me, when I come home, I'm excited about being with Ryan because that's a special time. The times I've been with him all day, it's harder to sustain that. I have household tasks and that kind of thing to do. So this is a very important part of our family life is daycare. The present daycare situation in Toronto is fairly desperate for most parents who are looking for daycare. I would say roughly, and I've never heard an argument against this figure, roughly 10% of the children who need daycare have spaces available to them in Toronto. For many parents, I would go so far as to say most parents, daycare is too expensive. Even if there is a space available, 20% of their income will go toward daycare for one child. You multiply that for two children, and it's not an uncommon situation. You have a family who is paying 40% of their income in order to have a child in daycare. Action Daycare is a group of people composed of parents, daycare workers, and people who are just committed to free universal daycare. One other part of that is that we are very committed to the unionization of daycare workers. Daycare workers, like most other people who work with children in our society, are extremely underpaid. You're talking about a salary of around $9,000 or $10,000 for somebody who is essentially doing one of the most important jobs in our society.
And what is happening is that daycare workers are subsidizing the daycare system. In other words, if the government had to pay real living wages to daycare workers, in the government's terms, they wouldn't be able to afford daycare. It's only because daycare workers are committed to the development of children and the provision of daycare that daycare exists. And I think it's about time, and Action Daycare agrees, that daycare workers begin to unionize and say, we demand to have a living wage because taking care of children is important. Our approach to winning this is mainly around mass action. In other words, what we're trying to do is educate people about the need for daycare. We're trying to involve people in the fight for daycare by involving them in public demonstrations, in public meetings, in writing briefs, in leafleting, in any way that we can begin to tell the government that we believe that free universal care is essential.
There are more and more women working, but there's no expansion of services. No longer is it a service for the few. It's now a service that the majority of children in Metro Toronto need. But the system for providing it is hopelessly antiquated. I want us to think about the kind of system we really need. We need a system as accessible as the public school system. We need to be able to go down the block and find a local center and be offered a choice of group care or private home care. Care for children whose parents work shifts. Care for children when they or their parents are sick. Part-time care for part-time workers and to give a break for mothers who are at home. Staffed by workers who are paid decent wages. And we need that system to be a free system with no fees attached to it. You can tell me that I'm dreaming, but you know there are other countries that have made some steps in that direction. Countries like France and Sweden and Cuba. And they're countries that are poorer than we are. How can they afford it when we can't? We've fought and we've succeeded in raising the provincial contribution to Metro Daycare from an 8% increase to over 14%. We learned two lessons from that. The first is that this government is open to pressure. But we're out here today because we learned something else. We're not going to be bought off with crumbs anymore.
Each year on March 8th, International Women's Day, women across the world join together to celebrate our strength and our unity, and to highlight the continuing struggles of women to gain equality and justice.
Today, we have marched to reaffirm our determination to win in all our struggles. And today, we have marched together. In marching together, we are saying that all these struggles are one. They belong to all of us. We cannot say, oh, that's her issue because that's her union, or that's where she works, or that's her issue because she's a working mother, or that's her issue because she's a lesbian. These issues are tied together, and our strength is in fighting them together, and we are.
It is 1992, more than 10 years since I made this video on women organizing. I'd like to reflect on what has changed over the decade. The wage gap has diminished only slightly. A woman now makes 64 cents for every dollar a man earns. Almost all two-parent families rely on two incomes, and 57% of single-parent families headed by women are poor. Women are increasingly vulnerable to poverty. Even women working full-time are often poor. In 1987, a full-time minimum wage worker with 2 children to support would only make about 2/3 of the $20,000 necessary to live above the poverty line in the city of Toronto. and almost 70% of minimum wage workers are women. Women's low wages mean poverty for women and for their children. In fact, over 1 million Canadian children live in poverty, in large part because their mothers are poor. Kathy Schwartz, the contestant in Choose Your Fate, would be in the workforce today, but probably in a female job ghetto. In 1988, 84% of all women workers were employed in service industries. Women's access to non-traditional skilled and professional work is still limited by stereotypes and structural barriers. The childcare situation continues to be desperate, with spots for only 10% of the children who need them. Fees are going up and spaces subsidized by the government are mostly unavailable. Without accessible and affordable childcare, women are unable to work for wages and are often forced onto government assistance. Unfortunately, most women still face a double day of work. Women have moved into the world of waged work. 60% of married women are in the workforce, but men have not fully taken on their share of domestic work. Study after study demonstrates that women do more housework and childcare, sometimes 3 or 4 times as much as men. On a more positive note, men's attitudes to housework are changing. A 1986 Gallup poll showed that 82% of men believe that husbands should help with the housework, up from 62% in 1976. Men are not yet doing their share of housework, but the change in attitudes is a beginning. 10 years ago, the Equal Pay Coalition argued for equal pay for work of equal value. In this area, Ontario women have won an important victory. In 1988, the Ontario Pay Equity Act, which supports the principle of equal value, came into force. Although its coverage of women workers is limited, some have made major gains. Comparing the work of nurses to that of police officers and the work of secretaries to that of maintenance workers has led to hefty increases for some women. For example, in January 1990, the federal government finally admitted that 90% of women in the female-dominated public sector have been grossly underpaid and offered $317 million to equalize women's pay. In March 1990, 31,000 Ontario civil servants won $84 million in pay equity increases. The size of these increases suggests that Margot Trevelyan was right when she said 10 years ago that women workers are subsidizing the economy. Lynn Joseph and Laurel Fisher, trained as machinists but unable to find work in their trade, might benefit today from a greater acceptance of affirmative action for women, visible minorities, people with disabilities, and Aboriginal peoples. As a result of organizing by these groups, the Ontario NDP government came out with a draft proposal in December 1991 on employment equity. Hopefully, new legislation will ensure real change. Women's organizing has focused, with some success, on 2 strategies to improve the conditions of women workers: pay equity to increase women's wages in female job ghettos, and employment equity to increase women's access to higher-paying male-dominated jobs in the skilled trades, in the professions, and in management. The gains women are making are threatened by the Canadian government's support of free trade. Free trade has meant plant closings in Ontario as employers move to find cheaper labor in poorer countries. As a result, many immigrant women in the garment industry have been thrown out of work. Such closures also make it virtually impossible for women to enter non-traditional manufacturing employment. The few new jobs that are opening up are in the service industry, often part-time, low-paid, and ununionized. In fact, in 1988, 72% of all part-time workers were women. Free trade is very much a women's issue. Women have been organizing to prevent the inclusion of Mexico in the free trade agreement. Women are also putting forward a vision for a restructured Canadian economy that will provide well-paying and secure full-time work for Canadian women. In fact, economic independence, along with quality childcare and an end to the double day, are central demands of the women's movement. Without these, women do not have control over their lives. So it is 10 years later, women are still rising up strong, organizing to enhance the quality of our lives, to change the sexual division of labor, to improve our working conditions and wages. Some gains have been won. Much remains to be done. The women's movement is stronger than ever. The National Action Committee on the Status of Women, which began in 1971, reports a membership of 600 women's groups. The movement of trade union women has been expanding as more and more women join unions and pressure them to take up women's concerns. Between 1980 and 1986, female membership in unions grew almost 6 times as fast as male membership. Women represent almost 40% of Canadian trade unionists. And unions are now addressing issues such as abortion, childcare, affirmative action, pay equity, sexual harassment, and violence against women. Perhaps it is appropriate to end this update with International Women's Day, celebrated every March across the country. In Toronto, the March 8th Coalition, increasingly sensitive to the diversity of women's experience, is taking up the concerns of women of color, immigrant women, women with disabilities, poor women, and Aboriginal women. In women's diversity is strength. In women's organizing is liberation.
And so we've got to fight back in large numbers, a fight back. I can't make it alone. Fight back in large numbers. Together we can make a safe home. Together we can make a safe home. Now some have an easy answer: buy a lock and live in a cage. But my fear is turning to anger, and my anger is turning to rage. And I won't live my life in a cage, no. So we gotta fight